Many have heard of this famous quote by Michael Hopf that states, quote, "Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times." Now, this quote has been used to describe civilization and its rise, prospering, and fall many, many times over and over again. And many have said that we are currently in the hard times. Now, people in self improvement, they know this. They know this very well because they've experienced it themselves. They've experienced what it's like to be weak. They've experienced what it's like to go through the hard times. And so, many men, they've decided that what they have to do is become strong. They have to become providers. They have to overcome their weakness and suffering. And I agree, that's a good thing. However, all that has ever been suggested is simply perpetuating the cycle. All that has ever been suggested is, oh, we need to go back into nature and then, be strong and then create the good times over there. Instead of saying, okay, not only do we have to get strong, but we have to sustain some degree of suffering in order to make sure that men continue to be strong, in order to make sure that we don't fall into this pit of weakness again. Because we may be getting strong now, but we are inevitably going to face the same period, if not worse than it is now, because we're not looking for a way to end it. And so in this video, we're going to focus on that. We're going to be focusing on how to end the hard times, weak men cycle. We need to discuss why this happens. For one, we've built our societies for comfort, safety, and security. And although having these things is not an issue in and of itself, for one, building a society for comfort, safety, and security, that's when the issue starts to show up. Because every advancement made is for the purpose of making life easier, for making it more pleasurable and enjoyable. And secondly, industrial society exasperates this comfort and security to a degree where we become conditioned to be consumers. Most people literally cannot live without entertainment. In the physical sense, they'll be fine. But for weeks on end, they will be extremely bored. They won't know what to do with themselves. They might come to some uncomfortable realizations about themselves because they've never taken the time to think. Most people today are dependent on industry. They're dependent on the comfort it provides, and they become consumers because of that, living as passive bystanders instead of active engagers in life. People also don't see nature as enjoyable as industrial society. So, although you may say, "Oh, well, if industry is so bad, why don't you just leave?" Firstly, industry is ever expanding, so that's pretty much impossible because at some point, whether you experience it, whether your kids or your grandkids experience it, industry will find them and it will take the nature that they're living in. And secondly, and more importantly for our discussion, people, because they're being raised in industrial society, they're being conditioned to not like nature. So if I tell you, or if I tell the average person, hey, let's go live in the woods for the rest of our lives, they'll likely say no. Excluding the fact that I'm just a stranger asking them this question, asking them to come with me into the middle of the forest. Excluding that, people, they know very well that nature is important, but they don't want to let go of the comforts of industrial society because they wouldn't have entertainment, they wouldn't have electricity, very likely, they wouldn't have like this heating system that we do, they wouldn't have cars, they wouldn't have ease of access to food. They'd have to farm, hunt, skin the animal, find nuts, forage, crack the nuts open. It's hard work, right? So, knowing this, people would much rather, although they know nature is important and nice and beautiful, they would much rather see it transfigured before they would live in it. Because living in it means abandoning all the comforts that we've been conditioned to love, that we've been conditioned to be dependent on. Most importantly of all, people are not experiencing enough spiritually livening suffering. Because don't get it wrong, people are still experiencing suffering, but they're not experiencing the type of suffering that is going to make their lives fulfilling. They're instead living as passive consumers. They're instead simply waking up, going to work, cog in the machine, standard, the standard person. They come home, clean, cook, indulge, and then go to sleep. Only to repeat the same thing the next day and the next day and the next day. It's a cycle of just it being. And this is suffering. You are suffering. But oftentimes we're too distracted to realize it. We've been taught to think this is good, this is comfortable, we need this. Industry is preferable. And yet it's not. In order to create a society where the good times and strong men exist simultaneously, this like idyllic period, we have to stop running away from suffering. We have to stop constructing societies around comfort, safety, and security, and instead treat these things as simple byproducts of a society. So, there are two things that we have to focus on constructing our societies around in order to achieve this: philosophy and primitivism. Primitivism allows us to live a life more in tune with nature. And primitivism in this sense, it means pre-industrial technology, a society that doesn't have things like cell phones, like computers, like automobiles, like electric lamps, like all these things that we've created with industry. And it also just means a life more in tune with how we've evolved to live. So eating less frequently, sleeping on harder surfaces. We're not going to have these like super soft, bouncy mattresses that we see in the modern age. We're going to be out in nature more, getting more sunlight. There's going to be more time spent with family. Now, although nature is fulfilling, in a civilization, philosophy is going to allow us to occupy our minds with something. It's going to allow us to experience that mental struggle, to find an answer to questions, to find the why, the how. And this will allow us to experience the fulfilling suffering that adds meaning to our lives. Because not only are we having to fight physically for, food, for the means of subsistence, but we're also having to fight mentally for answers. We're experiencing that turmoil when trying to achieve this goal. And this is how we lead fulfilling lives. And now before you say, "Oh, I wouldn't want to do that. This isn't me." What if somebody doesn't want to do that? The difference between this way of life, between the philosophizing, primitive way of life, and the industrial way of life, is that we are naturally wired to do the former. We are naturally wired to ask questions, to prefer the primitive lifestyle. It isn't natural that we wake up and then check our phones and then go on the computer and then go to work, sit for fucking 12, 14, 15, 16 hours a day. That isn't natural. What is natural is sitting and thinking about the world. What is natural is hunting for your food, farming your food. What is natural is waking up with your family, with your wife or husband next to you. Waking up, a little bit before the sun rises, building campfires. This way of life, this primitive way of life, it is what is fulfilling for humans because we've naturally been adjusted to that environment. We've evolved to like this, to prefer this over industry. And so to create a society where the good times and strong men coexist, where they exist simultaneously, we must create a society that is focused on philosophy and socio-political advancement and that lives naturally with pre-industrial technology, without the modern comforts, without this desire for an escape from suffering, without desiring to have more comfort, more of this, more of that, where people are simply just content with the lives they lead, but who desire to know more. And so, in essence, to maintain the good times whilst keeping the strong men. We must focus on philosophy in order to have that mental hardship and spiritual growth, and we must have a natural primitive life without post-industrial comforts in order to have that physical hardship. These two combined will allow us to experience suffering in a natural, fulfilling way, in the way that we've evolved to experience it. That's going to be all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. You can check out my Medium page in the description. I have essays that I post that don't get posted on my channel. And with that, I'm able to conclude this video.